Okay, so getting back to the 20s. First of all, you know, in January 1920, the Volstead Act, prohibition, was enacted. At the same time, it was very closely tied into the temperance movement. The suffragettes used to say, men whose lips touch liquor will never touch mine. The suffragettes movement was tied into the temperance movement, and that's when women got the vote, because there's a lot of quid pro quo going on here. You give us prohibition, we'll give you the vote. It was also when the ratification of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, and the League of Nations held their first meeting in Paris. So it was a time when there were lots of changes going on in the world. But there was also lots of fun stuff. The Charleston came into being. Women's fashions really changed. It was the very early 20s were sort of a little bit post-Victorian, but hemlines started to rise, girdles started to go, hair started to bob, and I've seen stuff, even in the Atlantic City paper, which really talked about it like an epidemic, that there was this new flamboyance and freedom for women that was threatening, and we have to do away with it, blah, blah, blah. Women started to smoke. And, you know, talk about Miss America. I'm going to just jump all over the place here. Miss America started here in 1921. It was sort of a promotion because the city ended Labor Day, and they wanted, we still had good weather, you know that. So they wanted to promote it for at least another week for economic reasons. And so they started this beauty pageant, which had 8 non-professional entrants. And you could not, at that time on the beach, women had to wear stockings all the way up. You couldn't roll them below your knees. That was, you know, they actually had women officers on the beach that walked around and told you, you have to have an undershirt on, Mr. So-and-so. Ladies, you know, you have to have your bathing suit has to come down to your knees. You have to have stockings on. But Miss America, Margaret Gorman, who won, she had her stockings rolled beneath her knees. And this was really very scandalous. But at the same time, there was a young woman who was arrested on the beach for wearing her stockings. And if you watch Boardwalk Empire, it kind of had that scene. It was one of the girls who unfortunately got murdered. Murder and mayhem, you know. But that really happened here because there was a lot of women who protested that. So the fashions changed a lot. Women started to smoke, bob their hair, and the jazz age came into being. Also, it was radio. Imagine radio came into being in the 1920s. And even the first television was invented. Now, you didn't see it in your homes, but technically it was being developed. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich was invented in the 1920s. Let me think. Of course, and if you saw the opening show of Boardwalk Empire, Margaret had a big party at Nucky's house, and it had the Egyptian theme, because in 1923, the year of this year's season, King Tut was discovered in Egypt. So it was a big, in fact, Convention Hall has an Egyptian motif. If you look at the columns and everything, it's Deco, but it's Egyptian motif. So that was a very big influence in this country and was a precursor to the Art Deco. Who do you think was the biggest movie star in the 1920s? Anybody?
Valentino.
You would think that, but it was Rin Tin Tin.
Which one?
Rin Tin Tin was actually he was a dog from France. He was actually in the war. He made 35 movies, and he actually said, I'm going to tell you everyone. I have to have a note here. You have to give me a second. I come across a note. I think it was. I want to tell you the name of the studio that he. Well, I'll come across, and I'll tell you when I come across it. But Rin Tin Tin was the biggest star in Hollywood. And we will get to Rudolph Valentino because he certainly was the second biggest star, and he has an Atlantic City history. Of course, you have the stock market crash in 1929. That affected everybody. And let me see, where am I? Mickey Mouse first was in 1920s in the famous movie Steamboat Willie was the first time he was drawn. And okay, now what do you think was invented in the 1920s? Q-tips. the traffic light, the combustible engine, the Band-Aid, the automobile, the Ford automobile, and the famous Scopes monkey trial was in the 1920s, where it was argued about creationism and, an argument we're still having today. So, and Freud's message, before the 1920s, everybody sort of thought that everything was done with your conscience, as a conscious mind. But in the 1920s, Freud had the theories that there's an unconscious mind that motivates you. Of course, this influenced novels and movies, and everybody was running to their analyst couch, so that was a big thing. And then Mahjong. How many of you played Mahjong? Mahjong was the 1920s. Now, films. Of course, the real filmmaking really started in northern New Jersey. I forget the name of the studio. But Thomas Edison used to come to the beach here and shoot early films. In fact, if you see Boardwalk Ballyhoo, the library's and museum's video, you'll see it opens up with Ford's films because he came down, not Ford, I'm sorry, Thomas Edison, same guy. Anyhow, he would come down here all the time and he would shoot, and he also was, of course, involved in all the electrical works that were done down here, and he also supervised. He didn't invent concrete, but he improved concrete. And he had something called the Portland Cement Company, and he supervised the building of the Blenheim Park, the Marlboro Blenheim. So movies were, the silent films, were just becoming very popular with the organ music playing. And Charles Chaplin was the biggest star also. He did a movie called The Kid. The first talkie was the Jazz Singer, which didn't premiere, but did open right here at the Warner Theater. That was with the famous Al Jolson. And Al Jolson was in Atlantic City, and my father told me a story. I don't know if you even know this, Michelle, that he was walking, my father knew all these people, he photographed them all, he knew them, and everybody called him Goldie, and he's walking down the boardwalk, and Al Jolson says, "Hey Goldie, you want a stick of gum?" And it's Al Jolson, he takes it, and it was a laxative. So, my father remembered that one. Kibitzer. Barbara Stanwyck was a Charleston dancer at the Cafe Beaux-Arts, which is featured in the show. Her name was Ruby Stevens. And so you had a lot of people who started here. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was a silent film. The Marx Brothers did the famous film The Coconuts. And there was a film that was done in 1927 that is one of the longest running plays on Broadway, Chicago. Was a film in 1927 about that story. Joan Crawford was first seen in The Dancing Daughters. And I told you that Rin Tin Tin, he saved Warner Brothers from bankruptcy. Now I come across it. Okay. Musically, do you all know the name Bessie Smith? Yes. Well, she was really one of the foremost blues singers that ever recorded. She started her own label called Swan Label, and she played the Paradise Club in 1921 with the Charlie Johnson Band. And there's a picture. I've seen the picture, so I know it's true, not just a rumor. Okay, some of the songs that were popular in the 1920s, Rhapsody in Blue, George Gershwin, and it was recorded by Paul Whiteman, who used to play at the Ambassador. And Bessie Smith recorded St. Louis Blues, which these are songs we still listen to today. Margie was written in Atlantic City. Let me think. Yes, We Have No Bananas. You know that song. The Charleston was written. I'm not giving you exact dates because that's not what this is about today. We're just getting the feeling and the gestalt of everything. Tootsie Goodbye, but you all know the lyrics to that. Sweet Georgia Brown, that's on American Idol all the time. April Showers, Al Jolson played Atlantic City so often. Ethel Waters, Am I Blue? She also played down here. I'll See You in My Dreams by Isham Jones, who played Steel Pier. Singing in the Rain, everybody was singing in the rain. which interestingly enough, Singing in the Rain is still one of the most popular songs today. Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Me and My Shadow, Ted Williams, who played the Ritz, and Way Down Yonder in New Orleans. But now Prohibition affected music also, because here are some of the songs that came out of Prohibition. What will I do on Saturday night when the town goes dry? It's a smart little fella that stocked up his cellar. If I meet the guy who made this country dry. And Irving Berlin's You Can't Make Your Shimmy Shake on Tea. And there were tons more. Now, Atlantic City was the most famous tryout town for Broadway. And I'm not going to tell you all the shows because you won't know them. But I will tell you that every year the Ziegfeld Follies was here. And of course, Nucky dated every one of those girls. And No No Nanette was here, and No No Nanette was about Atlantic City. No. So, huh? Who, did someone say something? Oh, okay. So that took place here. Also, Garden Pier, I think, will be 100 years old next year. So some of the famous things that happen here, the giant typewriter. Have you ever heard of the giant typewriter? Okay, it's a very astute historical crowd. I'm impressed. So the giant typewriter weighed 28,000 pounds. It was originally built to show at the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. The carrier alone, you know the carrier, was 3,500 pounds. The dimension was 21 feet wide by 18 feet high, and it actually typed letters. Jack Dempsey played the typewriter. They had many different people who came and played this typewriter. And it was on Garden Pier, right in the front of the pier on the right. And then it went to Convention Hall. It was there for a long time. And then it was dismantled for scrap in World War II. Because we were very patriotic. So I told you about Miss America. We had, the Miss America pageant, really hasn't changed all that much in so many years, except that in the beginning, you could be Miss America, run again, run again, run again. The first Miss America, Margaret Gorman, I think she ran twice, if not 3 times, yeah. But the only time a Miss America ever won twice was Mary Catherine Campbell. She won 23 and 24, I think. 22 and 23, I'm glad I have Heather here. 22 and 23, and after that they changed it because they didn't want this repeat winners all the time. And all the early Miss Americas had very long, curly, wavy hair because they really didn't like this bobbing and shortening of the hair. So we had a really big history with Miss America, and even though it's in Vegas, it started here. Now let me talk to you about Rudolph Valentino a little bit. It has been, you'll see on the internet, every place, that it says he taught the tango here on Garden Pier in the tea dances. I'm not sure if that's really true. I actually started that rumor, and I see it repeated over and over. But I did read it someplace. I can't find my original, but I did read it. But he was what they call a taxi dancer. And if he did do it, it probably had to happen around 1917 when he was a taxi dancer in New York. That's someone who dances for a dime a dance. And it wouldn't be so unusual the way many musicians and people did. They came down in the summer to make some money here. So it's not out of the question that he did it. But by the 1920s, he was already in Hollywood making The Sheik, Son of the Sheik, Brother of the Sheik. But here's something that is true. I think it was 1926, let me see my note. Well, 1921 he made The Sheik, but in 1926, yeah. I have a picture, you have at the library, of him on WFPG. And he was here in Atlantic City, and he did make the comment on the radio that 75% of the pictures released today are a brazen insult to the public's intelligence. So, however, Son of the Sheik premiered at, I think, the Virginia Theater, and Gus Edwards, who was like, oh, I don't know, the Simon Cowell of the day, he did get him to dance the tango at this is documented, and it was the last thing he ever did because he died right after that. So he did have, if not an early history, which may or may not be true, he certainly did have a later history here. The other thing that happened here in the 1920s, which captured my imagination, we had so many really famous people that visited Atlantic City, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, he was a spiritualist, and he was buds with Harry Houdini, who was an anti-spiritualist, but he wanted to believe. He spent his life trying to see if his mother would contact him. She never did. But they held a seance at the Ambassador Hotel. And although Conan Doyle claimed that the table moved and he heard her talk, Houdini didn't buy any of this. And they had a kind of a personal parting of the ways. So that was there's been books written on that, and that really did happen. And let me see, where am I in all of this? I'm getting to the end of my notes. Of course, in 1929, the famous gangster convention happened in Atlantic City. Meyer Lansky came here for his honeymoon, and the gangster convention happened here where they came in from Chicago, Al Capone, blah, 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 and that's where they divided up all the territories. They wanted to make peace after everything that was going on in Chicago, the Valentine's Day's massacre. But I will tell you a little personal thing. I'm probably the only person in this room who met Meyer Lansky. Anybody else meet Meyer? I used to room for a short time with his daughter in New York. I had no idea who he was. He looked exactly like Lee Strasberg in The Godfather. He would come over to see his grandson. He was a little old guy with a vest, and I called him Mr. Lansky. And then, because there was a fire in my apartment building where I lived before. It wasn't in my apartment, but I was smoked out. And so I knew Sandy Lansky from the city. And I once told my dad, I said, I'm living with this girl, Sandy Lansky, blah, 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 her grandfather's Meyer Lansky. My father said, what? What? And I said, oh yeah, he's a nice, sweet old guy. He said, do you know who he is? Well, what Meyer Lansky didn't know at the time is that he's been featured in almost every book I've ever done. I did a book on Yiddish culture. He certainly talked about Jewish gangsters. He's certainly in my Atlantic City book. He started gambling because I did a book on Cuba. He started, he built the Riviera in Cuba. So when I met him, I wish I could say, you're going to be in every book I've ever done. I also met Nucky. As a little girl, I don't remember too much about Nucky, but I remember Flossie because she had red nails that were like the Catwoman. She was a very glamorous woman. So I did meet her. And so anyhow, I sent Terry Winters recently a joke that I saw in a very old New Yorker magazine. It was on the Boardwalk in Atlantic City, and it was a gun battle done in the rolling chairs. I said, hey, food for thought, that would be great. Because in 1929, they often went in the rolling chairs to discuss things because they didn't want to be bugged or listen to a reporter, so they did a lot of their dealings. So anyhow, I do have I don't have many pictures because I live in New York City and I couldn't get that together enough, but I do have two pictures that I think you can see. This is Nucky, Al Capone, and an unknown sidekick on the Boardwalk in Atlantic City from the famous gangster convention. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
And Nucky always said that picture was fake, that he was, Nucky photoshopped it right in 19. But actually, we have seen the picture. It's about 10 of them on the boardwalk, so I don't think it was fake. And I was very involved with the Miss America pageant. I was a page when my dad was a chief photographer. This is a picture my father took of me as Bess Morrison's page when I was 5 years old. And I'll end this with a true story. Bess Morrison, of course, was the first, maybe the only Jewish Miss America, and I'm sure I was the only Jewish page. And there was a lot of hoopla about the judges were told not to vote for her because she was Jewish. There's a lot of anti-Semitism. But my father really encouraged her. This was the end of World War II. And he told her, Bess, you stay in it. They wanted her to change her name from Meyerson. She says, I'm Bessie from the Bronx. But this is a true story. I'm 5 years old. I'm wearing this flamboyant white satin costume with Cuban heels. And the last night, the newsreels were there, and what was her name, that woman who ran, Lenore Slaughter. Lenore Slaughter came to me and said to me, this little 5-year-old girl, now, Vicki, don't trip tonight. The newsreels are here. Well, of course, I'm so conscious of not tripping. And this is on film. You can see this in Boardwalk Empire. Of course, I didn't trip, but I stumbled. And you see Bess stop, turn around, are you okay, Vicki? And go on. So that was a great memory. Anyhow, thank you so much. I hope some of you come to Stockton tomorrow. And Heather, thank you for asking me to do this with you.
We'd be happy to take questions if anyone has questions. Yes, sir.
I work with an organization called SABRE, Society of American Baseball Research, and I've been asked over the period of years from those guys, as well as the guys that run the Hall of Fame, they said, you should know. I said, I wish I did know, but I've never gotten an answer. And their question was about a team that played in Atlantic City, black players, and the name of the team was not the one you're thinking of, which everybody knew about that one. It was called Johnson's All-Stars.
Oh, yeah. I have pictures of that. Yes, we have pictures of it at the library.
Yes.
They were sponsored by Nucky Johnson, and
Well, how many? What were the 2 years that they had?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can find it out for you if you want to visit the librry. They were later called the Farley All-Stars when
Yes.
Nucky fell out of favor. And so we do have some pictures of that at the library.
Oh, that's how it got. Okay.
And of course, you know, Pop Lloyd.
Yeah, that's what everybody knows
He was
about
the
Pop
background
Lloyd.
Giants.
Yeah.
The background Giants, and I actually, one of my favorite.
Pop Lloyd played on that same team.
Yes. he
A
did.
couple for
He
2
was.
years. I knew that.
But he also played, as many of the Negro League teams did, in Cuba, and I have actually pictures of him playing in Havana.
Yeah, he played hundreds of games a year.
Yeah. And he was actually considered one of the greatest baseball players that ever lived, and had he been white at that time, he would have been on the Yankees or something like that. But you know, he is in the Hall of Fame, and he was the greatest shortstop in baseball history.
I had the
Really
pleasure of
one the
meeting him
greatest players.
before he died one time.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay. Yes?
Can I do a follow-up to that? It's funny that you said that because, as I said, my name is Ron Jordan, but I'm vice president of the Pop Lloyd Committee.
Oh, my
And
God.
as a baseball fan in 1927, the Negro World Series was held in Atlantic City. So it's a lot of history about Atlantic City and the Negro Leagues. And incidentally, a little side, this is the weekend of the Pop Lloyd Committee meeting, and tonight at Bally's at 6 o'clock, we are honoring Cecily Tyson.
See, my father knew who he picked to push me in that baby carriage. He's got the pictures if anybody wants to see it. He'll show it.
Any other? Yes, sir.
Heather, I heard from somebody there was that William Hearst and Nucky Johnson were interested in the same woman, but that's all I heard. What is the rest of that story?
Well, you know, really, William Hearst helped take down Nucky because it was Marion Davis who was his paramour, and for a while she was playing Broadway, and anybody who played Broadway came down here, and Nucky made a play for her. This is the rumor, I don't see this in print, but William Hearst's yellow journalism really helped take Nucky down. He really was relentless in pursuing his wrongdoings, and Nucky was arrested for IRS tax evasion. And you can see that if you look, you can go and see find newspaper clippings that William Hearst took a personal vendetta. I mean, nobody could take Nucky down, but Hearst was powerful enough to do it.
It's really interesting if you read some of the New York papers from that time period. The New Yorker had a particularly scathing article about it, but you read the Atlantic City version of it. The New Yorker is trying to attack our great city, and it's really interesting to compare them side by side.
By the way, everybody here knows the Irish pub, right?
Yeah.
On the museum board. That was the Elwood Hotel, and it was a speakeasy, and I had seen it in the New York Times, it was rated, so that's a speakeasy that I know existed.
There were others.
Oh, yeah, but that's when we were.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much all for being here today. We really